There are cases, for instance, where people have up to 5 different personalities. In cases of dissociation of personality, where, for instance, the one person, say, call it person A, doesn't know of the existence of the person B, but B knows of A. Or there may be a third personality, C, that doesn't know of the 2 others. You see, there are such cases in literature, but they are rare. The ordinary case is just an ordinary dissociation of a personality. One calls that a systematic dissociation, in contradistinction to the chaotic or unsystematic dissociation you find in schizophrenia. The ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. For instance, in the case where B knows of A, but A doesn't know of B, in that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C, because the ego has a more complete knowledge. A is a split-off personality. You see, when I say self, then you must not think of I, myself, because that is only your empirical self. That is covered by the term ego. But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of, what you know to be yourself. Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, to be accepted or not, accepted or rejected. And intuition, now there is a difficulty. You don't know ordinarily how intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got at that hunch or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had 2 patients. The man was a sensation type and the woman was an intuitive type. Of course, they felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that dive after fish, you know. And then after a certain time they come up again and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bet who first was to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out. Not at all. The woman won the bet completely. She was beating him on all points. Because by intuition she knew it before. See? Now, how is that possible? Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations. Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious. That is as near as I can get. So you see, we have constantly warnings, hints, that consist perhaps in a slight feeling of uneasiness, uncertainty, fear. Now, under primitive circumstances, you who pay attention to these things, they mean something. With us in our man-made, absolutely, apparently safe conditions, we don't need that function so very much, yet we still use it. So you find them intuitive types, for instance, amongst bankers, Wall Street men, they follow hunches, you know, gamblers of all descriptions. You find the type very frequently among doctors because it helps them in their prognosis. Sometimes a case can look quite normal, as it were, and you don't foresee any complications. Yet, an inner voice tells you, now look out, here is something not quite all right, you know. You cannot tell why and how, but we have a lot of subliminal perceptions, sense perceptions. And from those, we probably draw a good deal of our intuitions. But that is perception by the way of the unconscious. And you can observe that with intuitive types. You see, intuitive types very often do not perceive by their eyes or by their ears. They perceive by intuition. For instance, Once it happened that I had a woman patient in the morning at 9 o'clock. And you see, I often smoke my pipe and certain smell of tobacco or a cigar. And so she came and said, but you begin early. I said, you call it early at 9 o'clock? She said, no, you must have seen somebody at 8 o'clock. I said, how do you know? There had been a man there that come at 8 o'clock already. Then she said, oh, well, I just a hunch. There must have been a gentleman with you this morning. I said, how do you know it was a gentleman? He said, oh, well, I just had the impression, the atmosphere, it was just like a gentleman here. All the time, you know, the ashtray was under her nose, and there was a half-smoked cigar. But she wouldn't notice it. So you see, the intuitive is the type that doesn't see the stumbling block before his feet, but he had for 10 miles. Once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had seated her, she said, you know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen. I said, what? Yes, a snake, a black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen. And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. And she said, you know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake. Now, you see, our further conversation a little later was that she said, that was about in the middle of our treatment, that only lasted for 10 consultations. She had foretold me, I come 10 times, and then it's all right. I said, how do you know? Oh, I got a hunch, you see. And really, about the 5th or 6th hour, she said, doctor, I must tell you, the snake has risen. It is now about here. Hunch. And then on the 10th day, I said, now, this is our last hour. And do you feel cured? And she said, beaming, she said, you know, this morning it came up and came out of my mouth and the head was golden. And those were her last words. Now, you see, that same girl, when it comes to reality, she came to me because she couldn't hear the step of her feet anymore, because she walked on air, literally. She couldn't hear it. That frightened her. And when she came to me, I asked her for her address. And then she said, oh, pension so-and-so. Well, it is not just called pension, but it is a sort of pension. And it is, I never had heard of it. And I said, now, I'm curious, I never have heard of that place. Well, it's a very nice place, he said. Curious enough, there are only young girls there, very nice and very lively young girls. And they have a merry time. I often wish they would invite me to their merry evenings. And I said, but they amuse themselves all alone. Said, oh no, there are plenty of young gentlemen coming in, and they have a beautiful time, but they never invite me. It turned out that it was a private brother. And she was a perfectly decent girl, you know, of a very good family, not from here. She had found that place, I don't know how. And she was utterly unaware that those were all prostitutes. I said, for heaven's sake, you fell into a very dark place. You hastened to get out of it. You see, that was her sensation. She didn't see reality, but she had hunches like anything and came off. Now, you see, such a person cannot possibly speak of her experiences, because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy. I myself was quite shocked when I thought, for heaven's sake, is that case schizophrenia? Because you don't hear that kind of speech. But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything, and he even understands such kind of language. There are two groups, you see, the rational group and the irrational group. The rational group is thinking and feeling, because the ideal thinking is a rational result. Feeling also a rational result, rational values. That is differentiated feeling. Whereas sensation must needs be irrational, because it may not prejudice facts. You see, it shall not prejudice facts. The real ideal perception is that you have an accurate perception of the things as they are, without addition or corrections. On the other side, the intuition does not look at the things as they are. That is prison, that is anathema to intuition. It looks, ever so shortly at the things as they are, and makes off into an unconscious process, at the end of which we have seen something nobody else would have seen. Now, so you see, these people who yield the best results are always those people where introverted intuition comes in. But you see, that is a side aspect of it. It's not interesting. There the question is another question far more interesting, namely the terms they use. Hein himself uses the recognition, telepathy, etc. They mean nothing at all. They're words. But he thinks he has said something when he says telepathy. That's nothing. You see, while I am talking, I'm conscious of what I say, I'm conscious of myself, yet only to a certain extent. Quite a lot of things happen. For instance, I make gestures. I'm not conscious of them. They happen unconsciously. You can see them. I may say or use words, and I can't remember at all having used those words, or even at the moment I'm not conscious of them. So any amount of unconscious things occur in my conscious condition. I'm never wholly conscious of myself. While I'm trying, for instance, to elaborate an argument, at the same time, there are unconscious processes that continue, perhaps a dream which I had last night, or a part of myself thinks of God knows what, of a trip I'm going to take, or of such and such people I have seen, or when I'm writing a paper, I'm continuing writing that paper in my mind without knowing it. You can discover these things, say, in dreams, or if you are clever in immediate observation of an individual, then you see in the gestures or in the expression in the face that there is an act, what one calls une arrière-pensée, something behind consciousness, so that you have finally the feeling, well, that man has something up his sleeve, and you can even ask him now, what are you really thinking of? You're thinking all the time something else, yet he's not conscious of it. Or he may be. There are, of course, great individual differences. There are individuals who have amazing knowledge of themselves, of the things that go on in themselves. But even those people wouldn't be capable of knowing what is going on in their unconscious. For instance, they are not conscious of the fact that while they live a conscious life, all the time a myth is played in the unconscious. A myth that extends over centuries, namely archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual, through the centuries. You see, it is like a continuous stream, and that comes then to the daylight in the great movements, say in the political movements or in spiritual movements. For instance, in the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change, and that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted. If somebody has been clever enough to see what is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind, would be able to predict it. For instance, I have predicted the Nazi rising in Germany through the observation of my German patients. They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated, and with considerable detail. And I was already absolutely certain in the years before Hitler came, in the beginning of, well, I could say the year 1919, I was sure that something was threatening in Germany, something very big and very catastrophic. And I only knew it through the observation of the unconscious. I tried to show that there is a sort of unconscious, I then simply called it the unconscious, that clearly produces things which are historical and not personal. It was mythological material of the nature of which wasn't understood. And there I tried for the first time to produce a picture of the functioning of the unconscious, a functioning which allowed certain conclusions as to the nature of the unconscious. Then, after I had written that book, that cost me my friendship with Freud because he couldn't accept it. To him, the unconscious was a product of consciousness, and it simply contained the remnants. And it was a sort of storeroom where all the discarded things of consciousness were heaped up and left. But to me, the unconscious then was already a matrix, a sort of basis of consciousness of a creative nature, namely capable of autonomous acts, autonomous intrusions into consciousness. In other words, I took the existence of the unconscious for a real fact, or for a real autonomous factor capable of independent action. And now that was a problem. That was a problem of the very first order. And that made me think and furiously, because the whole of philosophy nowadays has not yet recognized this fact, that we have a counter-actor in our unconscious, that in our psyche there are two. Consciousness is one factor, and there is another factor, equally important, that is the unconscious, that can interfere with consciousness any time it pleases. And of course, I say to myself now, this is very uncomfortable, because I think I am the only master in my house, but I must admit that there's another somebody in that house that can play tricks. And I had to deal with the unfortunate victims of that interference every day in my patients. When we speak of the unconscious, we almost should say, which unconscious? Namely, is it that personal unconsciousness which is characteristic for a certain person, for a certain individual? And when in treatment, for instance, in the treatment of neurosis, you have to do with that personal unconscious for quite a while. And then only dreams come that show that the collective unconscious is touched upon. As long as there is material of a personal nature, you have to deal with the personal unconscious. But when you get to, say, to a question, to a problem, which is no more merely personal, but also collective, you get collective dreams. So for instance, you know, our society has collective problems, collective convictions, and so on. Now, we are very much influenced by them. For instance, you belong to a certain political party or to a certain confession, and that can be a serious determinant of your behavior. Now, as long as our personal conflict doesn't touch upon it, it's no question, it doesn't appear. But the moment you transcend your personal sphere and come to your unpersonal determinants, say to the question, a political question, or any other social question, which really matters to you, then you are confronted with a collective problem, and then you have collective dreams. I always insist that even a chronic neurosis has its true cause in the moment. Now, the neurosis is made every day by the wrong attitude the individual has. But that wrong attitude is a historical fact that needs to be explained historically by things that have happened in the past. But that is one-sided too, because, you know, all psychological facts are oriented not only to a cause, but also to a certain goal. They are, in a way, teleological, namely, they serve a certain purpose. And so, a wrong attitude can have originated in a certain way long ago, but it wouldn't exist today anymore if there were not immediate causes and immediate purposes that keep it alive today. So a neurosis can be finished suddenly on a certain day, despite of all causes. For instance, one has observed in the beginning of the war, the cases of compulsion neurosis that have lasted for many years suddenly were cured, because they got into an entirely new condition. It is like a shock. You see that with shock, even the schizophrenia can be vastly improved by a shock, because that's a new condition. It is a very shocking thing that shocks them out of their habitual attitude, and they are no more in it. Then the whole thing collapses, the whole system that has been built up for years. You see, there is no system about in therapy. In therapy, you treat the patient as he is in the present moment, irrespective of causes and such things. That is all more or less theoretical. There are cases who know just as much about their own neurosis as I know about it, in a way. In such cases, I can start right away with posing the problem. For instance, there is a case a professor of philosophy, and he imagines that he has cancer. He shows me several dozen X-ray plates that prove that there is no cancer. He says, of course I have no cancer, but nevertheless I'm afraid I could have one. You see, I have consulted so many surgeons, and they all assure me there is none, and I know there is none, but I might have one, you see, and that's enough. Now, you see, such a case can stop from one moment to the other. He simply stops thinking such a foolish thing. But that is exactly what he cannot do. And in such a case, I say, well, it's perfectly plain to you. It's nonsense what you believe. Now, why are you forced to believe such nonsense? What is the power that makes you think such a thing against your free will? You know it is nonsense, and why should you think it? Or what for should you think it? What is that power that makes you think such a thing? It's like a possession, you know, exactly. Like a demon in him makes him think like that, in spite of the fact that he doesn't want it. Then we have the problem. That is the problem for an intellectual man. And then I say, now, you see, you don't know. You have no answer. I have no answer. Now what are we going to do? I say, now we must see what you dream. Because the dream is the manifestation of the unconscious side. Now he never had heard of the unconscious side. So I must explain to him that he has an unconscious, and that the dream is a manifestation of it. And if we succeed in analyzing the dream, we might get an idea about that power that makes him think like that. You see? So in such a case, one can begin right away with the analysis of dreams. And in all cases that are a bit serious, mind you, this is not a simple case, this is a very serious and difficult case, in spite of the simplicity of the phenomenology, of the symptomatology. In all cases, after the preliminaries, as it were, history of the family, the medical anamnesis, etc., we come to that question. What is it in your unconscious that makes you wrong, that hinders you to think normally? And then we are there where we can begin with the observation of the unconscious. And then, day by day, one goes on by the data the unconscious produces. You see, we discuss the dream, and that gives a new surface to the whole problem, and we will have another dream, and the next dream gives again an answer, because the unconscious is in a compensated relation to consciousness, and after a while we get the full picture. And if he has a full picture, and has the necessary moral stamina, well, then he can be cured. But in the end, it is a moral question whether a man applies what he has learned or not. You know, there are plenty of facts in the observation of the unconscious where you come across cases, very peculiar kind of parallel events, namely that, say, I have a certain thought or a certain definite subject is occupying my attention, my interest. At the same time, something else, quite independently, happens that portrays just that thought. Now, this is utter nonsense, you know, looked at from a causal point of view. That it is not nonsense is made evident by the results of Reil's experiments. There is a probability, it is something more than chance, that such a case occurs. I have come across quite a number of cases where it was most astounding to find that two causal chains happened at the same time, but independent upon each other, so that you could say they have nothing to do with each other. Of course, it's quite clear. For instance, just so I speak of a red car, and at that moment a red car comes here, you see. Now, I hadn't seen it. It was impossible because it was behind the building. In this moment, the red car appears. Now, this is, one says, oh, that's mere chance. The Reil's experiment proves that these cases are not mere chances. Of course, many of these things are occurrences where we cannot apply such an argument. Otherwise, we would be superstitious. We can't say, now this car has appeared because here was some remarks have been made about the red car. Oh, this is a miracle that the red car appears. It is not, it is chance, just chance. But these chances happen more than chance allows. And that shows that there is something behind it.